Hello, football fans. Hello, hello, hello. Now, you've clicked this video because you want to know how England will beat the Ukraine. And it's not just because England's players on paper are better. There's a lot more to it than that. And Gareth Southgate has got a lot of questions, a lot of issues. But before we get to England-Ukraine, I've not really talked about England-Germany too much. So I'm just going to touch on that very briefly and talk about how that's going to affect what Gareth now does against Ukraine. Now, I wouldn't make a video with such certainty, but my pre-Germany game, I did a video sort of analysing what I thought he would play, the 11 that I would select, and yeah, he played the same system and all the things I mentioned in terms of control and the way that England had to approach the game and the way they had to play the fight at the back, in my opinion, and they had to stop Kimmich and Goossens on either side. It worked really well, and the control was there. It then allowed us to bring on some creative players later on when Germany thought the game was set, and then we were the team to change it. It was really, really interesting. The introduction of Jack Grealish at the point at which he was brought on was key, but it had to happen at a certain point. I don't believe you can start Grealish in every game and he's just going to have the same effect for that amount of time. That's not how football works. You have to give him a platform to play from, and England did a brilliant job at doing that. Of course, we will get to my 11 in this, but before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the Ukraine, because they're a side that, although they've been in the tournament, you might not be fully familiar with. So I've been done my research. I've rewatched the game against Sweden, and I've looked into them and how I think they're going to approach this, because they've got options, as have England, but the Ukraine have options. So in the first few games for Ukraine, Andriy Shevchenko, who is manager of Ukraine, which I completely knew, but then as soon as I saw him the first time in the tournament, I was like, Shevchenko's manager, that's lovely. It's not lovely anymore, Andre. We've got a job to do. So, in the game against Holland, in which they were defeated 3-2, a game that they fell behind in and then fought back in, as you might recall. 4-3-3 was the way that they went. Then they did the same thing again against North Macedonia and sort of unconvincingly beat them 2-1, really. Defeat to Ukraine, they are Ukraine. Defeat to Austria using the same system once again, 4-3-3. And then before that, they played Sweden and beat them again, playing that sort of 3-5-2 system. Of course, England have played a 3-4-3 or a 5-2-3 system, however you want to look at it. And it's interesting now that Ukraine have sort of shifted that at the same point that England did. Remember, England were playing a slightly more advanced sort of 4-2-3-1 system and changing it maybe to a 4-3-3 at times and things like that. Ukraine have done the same thing. Shevchenko has identified that Ukraine's ability to keep the ball in these games against Holland, against the Netherlands, sorry, it's confusing, against North Macedonia, against Austria, wasn't as good as it could have been, in my opinion, and they've decided to shift things around a little bit. And against Sweden, of course, they are somewhat fortunate because there's a red card. But actually, the way they technically move the ball is actually quite impressive. And they're not sort of here by fluke, in my opinion. They're not that different to Sweden. They're not that much better than Sweden, it must be said. It was a very even game, and the red card changed it. It was not a particularly nice challenge. So let's talk about why they're successful, who to look out for, and how England affects this. This is where my notes come in handy, because some of these names are a challenge. So the first thing to note about the Ukraine is that of the 4 matches they've played so far, not a clean sheet amongst them. They have been unable to stop the other side from scoring. They are, again, a little bit unfortunate maybe against Sweden. It's a bit of a deflection that sees the ball go in, but there were still options for Sweden. There were still opportunities, and the Ukraine are quite passive defensively in a way that I think works against Austria and against North Macedonia, and didn't work particularly well against the Netherlands, it was worth saying, and against pace is kind of what I'm getting at, and again didn't work particularly well against Sweden. Isaac had a few chances, Forsberg hits the bar. Like they're quite happy to let other teams shoot, but they're sort of trying to control where those shots are coming from. The amount of long range opportunities teams are having against Ukraine seems like it's happening more than it is for other sides, against other defenses. Now, it goes without saying that Yarmolenko is their guy, and for a man that's been sort of tipped with a move to the Premier League what feels like forever, whether it be Liverpool or Tottenham or whoever else that he's been linked with, that's never quite happened. He's still the man when it comes to the Ukraine. He is the player they look to, he's the player they're expecting things from as well, and there seems to be this idea on the pitch as well, even when he's there, like if they can get the ball to him, whether it be a pass or a shot or a goal, like he is their guy, more so than Harry Kane is for England, more so than lots of the top players are for their teams. Actually, I do think Yarmolenko, there's a lot on him in these games to be the man to make everything tick over and ultimately be their match winner. So if you can stop Yarmolenko, And there are ways in which to do that, whether you go tight on him, which I think is probably the best way. Like he's got a lot of creativity, a lot of technical ability, but I think if you can get tight enough to him and you can shut him down quite quickly, he's the kind of player that will drift out of games if you shut him out of it. And that's going to be crucial for England, to have someone deal with him. And and it's funny because I don't necessarily think that's going to happen with one player, in which I sort of said that someone, and it turned out to be Saka in the game, right? But someone like Mason Mount, whoever it would be, would shut down the likes of Yarmolenko in the way that Tony Kroos was sort of stopped from doing Tony Kroos things in the game against Germany. You can't do that with Yarmolenko necessarily. I think it has to be more of a team effort because he's more likely to drift around, especially as an attacking player, so it won't work quite the same. Now with Malinovsky, now this is fascinating. Shevchenko dropped Malinovsky. Now he has had a couple now fantastic seasons for Atalanta. He's been one of their star players. He's been a player that's tipped with a big move to a different European side at some stage. And Shevchenko, that's one of the easier ones. Shevchenko decided to drop him for this game. Now, I don't know if there's a fitness concern or the fact he didn't play particularly well against Austria and he didn't play particularly well against North Macedonia. He's got this thing of giving the ball away in quite crucial moments, and I think that's the sort of thing Shevchenko probably looked at and went, yeah, you're not going to play again. Not in a game where I need workers, right? And Shaparenko, hopefully that's how you say it, Shaparenko has been really good at that. Like he's come into the Ukrainian side, and look out for him against England. Because I think Ukraine will play the 3-5-2 system, which actually activates more, in my opinion, as a bit more of a 5, and then you have a 3 and a 2, and Yarmolenko has almost got a free role to play around whoever the striker is going to be on the day. Zinchenko controls the left-hand side, is more than happy to come inside. He has a bit of a free role from the left-hand side as well. Like, those are the two threats for me. Zinchenko, Manchester City, that of course a lot of people will have heard of, and then Yarmolenko on the other side sort of does the same thing, although he has got this license to drift around. Like in some of the systems, I've got here, like against Sweden, he's down as like the left striker. It's not really where he stays for the majority of the time. He loves to drift around all over the place, whereas Zinchenko is sort of pinned to that left-hand side, but again, understands his role in the team. He's allowed to drift in a little bit, and because they're playing through at the back, he's got those freedoms. Without the ball, they almost sit as like a flat back 5 at times, with the 3 in front, and they press in groups of 2 and 3 occasionally if Yarmolenko can decide to track back a little bit. But it's those 3 in the middle, and again, the man I'm sort of highlighting here is Shaparenko, who I think is one of the players that England have to stop. He can't be allowed to control the game. And there's this idea, because England are playing the Ukraine and they're not as good as Germany and they're not in theory as good as Croatia, right? And they're not one of the top teams left in the competition, that England should walk through this. And that attitude will get England beat, right? And I said before that if England go into the game against Germany and don't use a 5 at the back system and they play a 4 at the back system, I think they're going to lose. The same sort of applies with that logic, that if England go into this, I think they can roll through it, right, and don't work hard in the defensive areas of the pitch, then I'm not going to say they'll lose, because I still think there's enough quality within the England side to get through, but that'll make the job a lot harder than it needs to be. And that is something that England need to avoid. And that's why selection for Gareth here actually is really difficult, for reasons we'll come on to. So Shaparenko sort of controls things. Defensively, I said that, again, they're quite passive, but they're very good with the ball. Like they controlled it against Sweden. It's interesting, they didn't have the best of the game against Sweden until Sweden went down to 10 men. Most of the game was dictated by a 4-4-2 system from Sweden that was actually pretty effective. Like they dealt with it pretty well. It was a very even game for large periods, and no side, I would say, had complete control of it. You'd maybe edge it to Sweden. Again, they had slightly more of the ball, but it was quite even. And I think England will go into this game expecting to win. I've just said, like, they can't get over confident to the point of like, oh, this isn't Germany, we can walk through them. There still has to be that level of respect, but there's also the ability here for England to put on a performance. And I think the games against the Czech Republic and against Scotland and against Croatia, they haven't made us go, wow, we're here at the tournament now, this is so exciting. And even Germany, that game didn't either. The result was bigger than the performance in that one though, so you kind of let it go. But against the Ukraine here, it sounds like I'm saying both things. You can't be overexcited, you can't sort of remove your defensive responsibilities, but at the same time, like, this is where England could put on a performance, because in my opinion, if you get the Ukraine down a couple of goals, like the Dutch did, but then control it, and that's what England have been so good at, and I've used this word control a lot, and basically run Ukraine to the ground a little bit by just keeping the ball and being quite passive yourselves, and knowing areas where to utilize your forward players, but at the same time making them chase you. That's not really the game Ukraine want to play. Like, they can do that, but they'd rather be the side that have got a lead or that are in the game and can continue to do their work right and to allow Yarmolenko these opportunities to create for others and have chances himself. And I hate to sort of pin things on him because they are more than Yarmolenko and they are more than Shaparenko and they're more than having this back three that again control things and Zinchenko. They are a little more than that, but they are very workmanlike. They are they're kind of what you expect. I think when you think of Ukraine, you don't think of a really good attacking unit. You think of a side that are going to be difficult to break down, and they've got more technical ability than that. Basically, they're not just stoppers, and that's something that I think is quite crucial. So I think they'll play the 5-3-2 system, and again, like if you bring it up as it is here, you can kind of see this. I'm sort of in the way. If I just move over this side, you can see the three they've got there, and then the five. They sort of play Zinchenko and Kararev play just with like almost like free rolls down that right hand side in a similar way to Kimmich and Gustafsson, similar way to how Shaw and Trippier did at the weekend. There's defensive responsibility there, which acts more of a 5, like, and obviously that comes with who they're playing against. If they're matching up against a 5 as well, which I think England will probably play, I guess we'll come on to that now. I don't know. I don't think that's what Ukraine want, and I think that gives England an even better chance, because I don't think England matching this I don't think that's what Ukraine want at all. I think Ukraine want to play in the spaces that are unoccupied. I think Sweden set up in a way which Ukraine probably looked at and Shevchenko probably looked at and thought, that's going to be good for us. Now, the problem maybe that both teams have is it's hard to predict what the others are going to do. The Ukraine, throughout the tournament, have played this 4-3-3 system, which has had mixed success. You could argue they've beaten North Macedonia, but they definitely had, and it's a word I use a lot now, is had more control in the game against Sweden. So I'd be curious to see if they stick with it, especially against a side in England that I think they probably expect to have more of the ball. So there's going to have to be more chasing. There's going to have to be more discipline. Again, it leaves question marks for Ukraine as much as it does for England, who again could play the 4-2-3-1 system, could play a 4-3-3 system. Actually, that's something we'll come on to in a minute. It's good tactically. I think this game's really interesting. I'm fascinated. I love football. I love football, viewers. Okay, then let's move on to England. Let's talk about my 11 and go through one by one who I think should play and why I think they'll play, and why I don't think Gareth will play this team. But look, this isn't Gareth Southgate's team. This is the team that I would play, with some reasons as to why I would play them. I was pretty close with the Germany one. You got the system right. I forgot to mention Saka's name, but again, the player and the role did a similar thing, sort of sat around Tony Kroos. So Ukraine don't have Tony Kroos, so we've got something to be excited about. So in goal, let's keep it straightforward. Jordan Pickford regains his place. He's continuing, again, my England player of the tournament. Like I said, pre-tournament, he's doing it. He's so much better for England than Everton. Terrifying. Rafa Benitez is Everton. That's a weird thing to say. The three in front of him then, and of course the fullbacks as well, or the wing-backs as well. That's right, I'm going for a 5. We've got Luke Shaw, Harry Maguire, John Stones, Kyle Walker, and Kieran Trippier. That's right, I'm keeping the exact same 6 or 5 that played against Germany. There is a strong argument, because Harry Maguire's on a yellow card, that you would bring Tyrone Mings in and you play him instead. But I think keeping with the 5 is something the Ukraine side do not want us to do. They are not a fan of us trying to do something that they've just done, and I think we do better. CC Germany. In midfield, get your bingo cards at the ready. Yes, that's right. I have picked Jordan Henderson, but there's a bit more logic to this time. And we'll explain why. And next to him, maybe a bit of a surprise really, that it's not Jude Bellingham. I would put in Mason Mount, who's already had some game time in the tournament. To me, is probably a bit sharper as a result of that, even if he's not trained with the full team. I think Jude Bellingham, I think we're getting to the point with Bellingham that we've not necessarily seen enough of him, and maybe he's better to come on later in the game, maybe for Mount in this scenario. But Henderson and Mount go in there. They are both very industrious players, and the Ukraine, as we've sort of talked about, have 3 very industrious players to play in the midfield, which again is what I'm predicting they'll do. And we need players who are going to get amongst that. And those players, to my mind, and this is why Henderson has to start, and it's not because he plays for Liverpool and I support Liverpool as much as some people think that. It's because this time around, Declan Rice, Calvin Phillips are both on yellow cards, and those yellow cards after this game against the Ukraine disappear. Now, is this a gamble? Are you trying to book your spot in the semi-finals before you're even there? A little bit. Like, Rice and Phillips were phenomenal against Germany. They were defensively very, very strong. Phillips may be a little lucky to stay on the pitch. One of his tackles was a little reckless. But you can't... Basically, I don't want players on the pitch that are worried about getting booked. And at some point in the game, you might need to get booked. So having those 2 players that are fresh, that are ready to go, and Mason Mount and Jordan Henderson, the 2 players that I think will be good at controlling the game in similar ways to Rice and to Phillips, and equally can do so without the fear of being booked. Like if we're lacking a little bit of control, maybe you change it around a little bit. Maybe you push Henderson slightly deeper, you play Mount and maybe Bellingham just in front of him, you take Maguire out, who's also on a booking, and you play a 4 at the back system, and you play a 3, and you change the triangle slightly, right? But again, I think Gareth will stick with a similar system, a system that he knows will work, a system that he can bring players in and take players out of quite easily. And again, I think there's an argument for Bellingham, but I think that Mason Mount is probably the right guy, and that's because of what's in front of him. I think Mount's ability to get forward and move into spaces left by Kane or by Jack Grealish or Jadon Sancho or Harry Kane, as mentioned before, is important. So that's my front 3, Grealish, Kane and Sancho. This is a game where England need to be a little bit smarter, especially offensively. I thought Saka has done really well in the games that he's played, but I think against the Ukraine, when they haven't got a player that needs sort of dealing with in the same way that Toni Kroos needed dealing with, and Saka did a pretty good job at that, and it actually limited what he did offensively. We didn't see Saka dribble with the ball as often. We didn't see him make some passes that are a little bit more risky. He was very much aware that if England lose it, he has to be prepared to fill in and sit in and disrupt the German left side, and that included sort of the deeper sitting Toni Kroos at times. With this game, you don't have to do that quite as much, right? And you need players. In my opinion, the width that England create is really important, and we saw that with Grealish in the first game. I really hate the idea, and I might have talked about this before, right? I really hate the idea that Jack Grealish has to start, because like, he created some chances against Germany. So if he's doing that in 20 minutes, imagine what you do in 90 minutes. It's not how football works. England set themselves up and I called it in my preview video for Germany. I said you have to be in control at 60-65, and then our bench allows us to bring on players like Sancho and Grealish and Foden to make impacts in games later on when the game is set. And Germany felt like they were in control, and then Southgate went, boom, actually you're not. Watch this. Grealish came on, Shaw started to overlap beautifully, and goals were scored, right? And I don't think Grealish played like... I don't think it was absolutely pivotal, but it's his movement and his creativity that you could argue to say changes those things, right? You'd like to think the pass to Shaw, where he's moving forward, is the most like obvious pass that anyone would do it, but the important thing is that he's there to do it. And whether you think Grealish is the be-all end-all or not, he's a creative player that scares opposition players, and so is Jadon Sancho. And the Ukraine having to deal with 2 of those players, to me, is quite stressful. Of course, what this means, and this is sort of the elephant in the room really, is that Raheem Sterling's not starting. He scored 4 goals in the tournament. How on earth can you now not play Raheem? Well, my fear with Raheem, and it's not necessarily going to happen, and he's a professional footballer and he seems fit as a fiddle, like, doesn't seem to be lagging at all. He's come off in a couple of games. Is that if you play Sterling in this game, you start him in this game, and then you play him again in the semi-final, because you would, and then you play him again in the final, because of course you would, then he's going to be knackered by the time you play a Belgium or an Italy or Spain. And then you're thinking, we should have rested him against Ukraine. And I think Gareth Southgate has done a really good job so far of managing this tournament, managing the group stage, and getting through Germany and outthinking them and being smarter than the Germans, which I don't think anyone expected. This has to be another one of those times, and you have to take a bit of a risk. And this is why this selection is so difficult, because I'm asking Gareth here to drop the 2 central midfielders, the 2 rocks that he's had there that have been really consistent. I'm asking him to drop Sterling, who is scoring goals for England, a bit of an issue for England. You can bring him off the bench, kind of. You can bring him on if you need to. If Grealish isn't having the impact, or Sancho's not having the impact, well, Sterling can play both of those roles and play both of those roles relatively effectively. So at least you've still got those options. You're not denying yourself that, right? And you can bring Foden off the bench if you want to, and you can bring Bellingham off to be a little bit more creative in midfield if the game is opening itself up like that. But I think this is where you give him a break, and you do it in a moment where you're bringing quite a few players in with a point to prove. Is it too much change? Do I think he'll do it? Probably not. But like, I also think if it were me at this stage, I think England's quality and the team I'm selecting here, the team you can see, is good enough, and that team should be beating the Ukraine. And do you know what, even if you made a couple more changes, if you brought Reece James in at right back, for example, if you brought Tyrone Mings in for Harry Maguire, that team should beat Ukraine as well. And as much as I'm trying not to overstate the idea that we should just walk through Ukraine, I'm not worried about that. I don't think Gareth Southgate for a second is taking Ukraine lightly, and I don't think the players are. I do think there's also opportunities for England to be better here and to be a bit more exciting. I don't think Gareth Southgate has got easy decisions to make, but what I do think he has is a squad that is capable of doing things like this. And this is why like going into the tournament, we were quite excited. Again, the 11 wasn't obvious, and it's not obvious going into this one. But I do think you've got to utilize it. And I think this game allows you the opportunity to utilize it. If you want to revert it back, like halfway through the game, if it's not working, you want to try and bring Ryzen Phillips on, and you want to wrestle the control back. Maybe you've lost it. Maybe it's not worked. You've got 5 subs, Gareth. Bring all 3 of them on. Bring Sterling back in. You know, drop out Henderson and Mount and change it back. And look, that is not the smartest decision. It's not a decision I think you should ever make. And I'd like to think that wouldn't happen to begin with. But it does still have the option if it's not quite clicking. I can't imagine England. Let's hope this doesn't happen. I can't imagine England being 4-0 down at half time, right? And then thinking, well, now what do we do? I think, again, there'll be this moment. The first half won't be that exciting. It'll be a moment of control. But I think it'll be a bit more exciting if you play Grealish and if you play Sancho. So I'd give it a whirl. We did brilliantly at controlling Germany. And you don't have to control the Ukraine in quite the same way. But they will cause problems. They will have opportunities. This is football. You can't expect it to be flawless. What England's done so far is deal with those. And, you know, shout out to Thomas Muller for also dealing with one of those opportunities. But they've got a chance now going forward. The tournament is set for them. I'm backing them. Are they going to win the whole tournament? The game in the final looks difficult. On paper, England should beat the Ukraine. They should beat either Denmark or the Czech Republic. They've beaten the Czech Republic already. It could happen. It's exciting. What do you think will happen? What would be your 11? I think a lot of you will go with 4s. I think a lot of you will go back to a 4 at the back system and try and blow them out of the water. I just don't think that Gareth is going to do that. I don't think the players are set to do that. But again, I'm really interested to see if you would still do it. If you would try and open up a little bit, right? Maybe play Foden, bring him back in, play Grealish, play Sancho, play Sterling, play Kane. Play all of them. Let me know in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, enjoyed the analysis, drop a like on it. If you want to see some more, make sure you subscribe. And we love with care. From DoctorBenjy until next time. I'll see you again soon. Goodbye. It's coming home. It's coming home.